Hey guys, welcome back in the part 2 of lab 2 from OAuth vulnerabilities. So in the previous video, we see what is OpenID, how it works, key points, some roles, and about the dynamic client registration and where actually the vulnerability exists in dynamic client registration process. So in this lab, we are going to solve the lab, and let's see, the description of this lab is saying this lab allows client application to dynamically register themselves with the OAuth service via our dedicated registration endpoint, and some client specific data is used in an unsafe way by the OAuth service, which exposes a potential vector for server side request forgery. To solve the lab, we need to craft an SSRF attack to access this endpoint, okay, and steal the secret access key for OAuth provider's cloud environment. We have one valid credential, Wiener, and the password is Peter. But in this lab, unfortunately, I did not find a way to interact with any out of band endpoint from this lab. So because this lab actually blocks any request that goes to the external endpoint or out of band endpoint. So we must use Burp Suite Collaborator or Burp Collaborator as our default public server. Although it will be beneficial if this lab contains the exploit server, so that will be more beneficial to understand, but no problem, you can consider. We already did a lot of labs with the exploit server, and we know the concept, right? So let's go. I'm gonna access the lab here, and with that I wanna enable the burp proxy on my browser so that all of the requests we can see here and go through the burp proxy. So as you can see, the page is open, the application is open, and these all the requests coming and going through the burp proxy. So I'm directly going to log in, and we will see and analyze a request. So once I click to my account or to log in the page, you can see it's redirecting us to the social media login page. So this is the social media login page. If I go back to my burp proxy, you can see I clicked on my account, which is redirecting us to the social media login page, and this is the social media login page. And this is the first request from the third-party client application who needs to access the authorization. Okay, so this is the first request. You can see /auth is the endpoint, and this is the query string where the first parameter is client ID. So you can see once we will register this this client with the OAuth service, this is gonna be our client ID. Now the redirect URI is again the callback endpoint. Okay, so that we will get the token or authorization code on this endpoint. Okay, and the response type, you can see here, the response type is only code. That means authorization code grant type or flow is being used here. And the scope, you can see, this is the important part. You can see within the scope we find OpenID space profile space email. That means OpenID is there. Fine. Now let's go back, and I'm going to enter my username and password. Username is Wiener and the password is Peter. And once I click here, it will ask me the consent, because the third-party application wants to access my profile information and my email information. So I must provide the consent, or I must permit the third-party application, okay, you can access my information. So if I go back here, you can see this is the post request interaction request where I put the username and password. And once I click OK, it is going to get the consent from the user. So let's go and provide the consent. Once I click, now you can see we are successfully logged in. So you have successfully logged in with your social media account. I will say continue. And once we say continue, you can see we come to the root directory or the home page of the application. Now if we go to the my account, you will see we are logged in. Okay, now in this process, this time I am more interested in the OpenID. Okay, so what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna first see the request where we can find out the server for the OAuth service. Okay, so this is the server which is providing the OAuth service. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just going to send this request to the repeater. Go to the repeater. Let's just send one more time. Let's see. Okay, 400 bad request. I know, because at this moment I think we are not authenticated or authorized at this point. Yeah, we are authenticated from this point, I think. No. Social media. This is the point where we logged in. So whatever the thing is, we just need any request that is communicating with the OAuth API service. So we send that request, and we can also send this request or any other request you want. Let's say this one, send this to the repeater. Go to the repeater and just enter or send this request. You can see 400 bad requests, no problem in that, but my purpose is something else. So my purpose is what? My purpose is to actually see the configuration file of the OpenID. So this is the endpoint usually on which we will get the configuration file. So configuration file of OpenID. So I'm gonna paste it here and send the request. So as you can see, 200 OK, and this is the configuration file of the OpenID. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna copy the URL and open it on a new tab. Okay, so whether you see here in the burp suite, same thing. So you can see this is the authorization endpoint /auth, and there is a claim parameter supported fall and what claims are supported. So subject name, email, verified, SID, issue time, authentication time, all these are the parameters. This is the session ending. Grant type. So grant type supported are two. First one is refresh token and another one is authorization code. Fine, because we do not see a ID underscore token. So authorization code is there. Okay, so ID token signing algorithm values, these are the algorithm for signing if it will use the JWT token. So but here no JWT token is there, so no problem. But this endpoint is very important, what we are looking for. So actually once we try to register with the OpenID, okay, so at what endpoint the client will be registered. So you can see this is the registration endpoint, and in this endpoint the client will be registered. So if I click here on this link, you can see something went wrong because in this is the invalid request. And why this is invalid request? Because by default we are using the get method, and this get method is not allowed on this endpoint. Fine. So what I'm gonna do, we need to create one request which is post request. So let's say come back here, this is okay. I'm gonna change request type or request method to post request, and we need to use registration endpoint. Okay, we don't need these all the things. Okay, we don't need that. And also here we need to use JSON content type. Why? Because once the client will send the request for the registration, okay, the request post body section will be in the JSON format, and it is something like this. So what I'm going to do here is I'm gonna create a post body section, and it's gonna be in the JSON format. So let's say you can see there is one portion where we can put the redirect URIs. Okay, so let's go, and I'm gonna say redirect underscore URIs, and here I'm gonna put https://example.com or whatever you want. Fine. So let's send this request and we will see what we get. So once we send this request, you can see 201 and created. That means the client is registered successfully. So you can see the client is registered successfully, and we are now have one unique client ID, and with this client ID, this client will be identified. Fine. So that's good. That's perfect. And why this is happening? Because you see, once we try to register, we directly authorized, okay, and the registration process is successful without authentication. So if there is authentication for the registration, we will not get this response. Fine. Now one more thing we need to find out here. If we go to the proxy again and we analyze the request, so you will see once we provide the consent after the authentication, there is there is a request. Let's see the request of, here we authenticated, right? This is the request where we authenticated, put the username and password and make continue. Then after that we have this endpoint, okay, and this endpoint. And this endpoint is important. Why? Because what we saw in the previous video, that once you try to register your client, you can also provide the logo URIs or different kind of URIs. So you can see there is one logo URI, and here also this is for the logo. And if you see the response, you will know very easily that this is the SVG extension. So the logo is in the SVG format, okay, and this is how it's trying to access the logo with the URI. So why not if we go and put the logo URI? Let's see we can do that or not. But before that, I want to make sure one more thing, because as you can see, this is the registration process and it is successful. So what I'm gonna do, why not I first of all verify whether it's well or not, whether we are registered or not. So to just verify, to show you that okay, we are registered, I'm gonna take this client ID. So I'm going to copy this client ID, okay, and go back, not this one, go back here. Let's just send this request to the repeater, okay, because we have client and this is the client ID and this is the logo. So I'm going to change this client ID. This is the genuine client ID, okay. I'm going to change it and paste the client ID which we just got at the time of registration, client registration, dynamic client registration, okay. So back here and send this request. Let's see what happened. 204 no content, because there is no logo exist at this client ID, okay. But it doesn't mean the request is providing you error. This is not error, this is actually the message that okay, the request is successful but it does not find any content. Fine. So let's go back to the request, this one, and here what we are gonna do is we are gonna provide here come on, logo URI, right? So logo underscore URI, and then we need to define here the URI. Now the thing is, whatever logo URI we provided, the service side from the server which is providing the OpenID service, that server trying to access this URL whatever we provide here, and this is where the SSRF or server side request forgery exists. So if we put here, suppose that we have a server, a web server, and we put here the URL of that server and we send the request, and once we send the request, it goes to the OpenID service provider, and the service provider trying to access this URL, and because this URL is our controlled server, so we will get the hit on our server, which is same like access log what you see in the exploit server. So if we get a hit from the OpenID provider, that means this is SSRF. Fine. And in that way we can try to access even internal services within the OpenID provider. Fine. So here we are gonna attempt out of band interaction. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to burp collaborator client. In real world scenario, you should have your web server, any server, whether it is Python, Java, or whatever server is it. The only purpose is once you put the URL here, you should get the hit on your server in the access logs. So just paste that and HTTPS, let's say, and that's it. Send this request, and once we send this request, so we send the request, and as you can see, we get now new client ID. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just copy this, no, not URL, copy this string, okay, and go back to this request where it will try to access the logo. Fine. So because it is registered with the client ID, so what we need to do here is, again, I'm going to change the client ID and we try to access this one. Go back to the burp collaborator client. If we poll now, let's see, up to now there is nothing, okay, nothing. But once we send this request, so because the client ID, this client ID is registered with this logo URI, so at that instant the provider, OpenID provider, will try to access the logo. And as you can see, 200, okay, that means we should now get the hit here, and as you can see, we get the hit here. So that means SSRF exists here. Fine. Now our purpose is to test the SSRF, and we test it with the out of band interaction approach. Now to solve the lab, actually what they mentioned with the lab, that if you find the SSRF, then you need to create the SSRF attack to access this service. So let's say this is the internal service within the OpenID provider. This is the service for the identity and access management, you can see, and it contains the security credentials for the admin. So what we just need to do here is copy this link back to our burp proxy, and what we need to do here is, instead of this, what I'm gonna do is change that, paste that, okay, and send the request. So once we send the request, because we are dynamically registering the client, so we should have one client ID, and as you can see, we have newly generated client ID. Now because on the logo URI we provided this URL, so that means this URL is registered with this client ID. So I'm going to copy this client ID and again back to the request for the logo, and instead of this client ID I'm gonna paste that. Now why this is special this time, because this specific service is very confidential service, because you can see this is regarding identity and access management with the security credentials of admin. Okay, so that's why this is confidential endpoint. But now because it is registered as a logo URI with the client, so we put client ID and /logo, and if we access this endpoint, you can see we get some confidential information as access key ID, secret access key. This is what our top priority. As a hacker, this is the top priority. If you get the secret access key, then boom. So this is what we needed. And if we copy that back to our lab and go to submit the solution, just paste that here. Okay, and we solve the lab. Fine. So this is what we need to see in this lab by exploiting SSRF, how you identify whether SSRF vulnerability exists or not, how you analyze the request. So you must have a good idea about each and every step of the flow, and then you can analyze each and every request. You can try to register the client, because dynamic client registration is allowed but without authentication. That's why the vulnerability exists. If it is authenticated, then we follow other ways and we find out some other vulnerabilities. So that's it for this lab. If you like the content, please like, subscribe and share. I'm gonna see you in the next video. Bye.